For 30 years, my house was the one place my entire family gathered every single Christmas. Not because anyone forced them to, because they wanted to. Until the year my own son decided my presence was the one thing standing in the way of peace. My name is Margaret. I was 68 years old when I learned that the home I had opened to my family for 3 decades could just as easily be closed to them. The moment closing it became the only way left to protect my own dignity. Let me tell you about that house first because it matters. My husband, Robert, and I bought it when we were newly married, barely able to afford the down payment. We raised our son, Ryan, within those walls. We hosted every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary Sunday dinner that somehow turned into a gathering of 15 people because someone always brought a cousin, a neighbor, a friend who had nowhere else to be. That house wasn't just a building. It was the center of gravity for an entire extended family, nearly 40 relatives, if you counted everyone who showed up every Christmas without fail. Robert passed away 11 years ago. After he was gone, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I kept hosting Christmas exactly the way we always had. Some people thought I should slow down, let someone else take over the responsibility. But cooking for that many people, decorating that big house, watching 4 generations fill every room with noise and laughter, that had become the thing that kept me going every December. It wasn't a burden, it was my purpose. My son Ryan married Vanessa 9 years ago. I want to be fair here because this isn't a simple story about a wicked daughter-in-law and an innocent mother-in-law. Vanessa and I started off well enough. Polite, respectful, the kind of relationship where both people are trying, even if trying doesn't always translate into closeness. But somewhere over those 9 years, something shifted. Small disagreements about how things should be done at family gatherings, comments about my old-fashioned way of hosting, suggestions delivered through Ryan rather than directly to me that maybe Christmas should be simplified this year or moved somewhere smaller, or just close family, nothing too big. Each individual comment seemed reasonable enough on its own. Families evolve. Traditions change. I told myself that repeatedly, even as I felt myself being slowly, carefully pushed toward the edges of my own family's gathering. Ryan, to his credit, used to defend the tradition in the early years. "Mom's house is where Christmas happens," he'd tell Vanessa. "That's just how our family works." But over time, that defense grew quieter, softer, less certain, until eventually it stopped happening altogether. I noticed the shift most clearly 2 years ago when Vanessa suggested, through Ryan of course, that perhaps I should step back from the cooking, let a catering service handle things instead, since it would be less stressful for everyone. I agreed, though something in me understood this wasn't really about stress. It was about control, about slowly redefining whose house this celebration actually belonged to, even though the deed still had my name on it. Last year, the guest list conversations started happening without me entirely. I would hear, secondhand, through my sister or my niece, that decisions about who was invited, what time things would start, what the new format of Christmas would look like, were being made in conversations I wasn't part of. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself families naturally shift as children grow up and build their own households. I told myself a lot of things that year, trying desperately to avoid facing what was actually happening. This year, I stopped being able to tell myself anything at all. Because this year, 2 weeks before Christmas, my son called me with news that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in early December. I remember exactly what I was doing, going through my recipe box, the same worn cardboard box I'd used for 30 years, planning the Christmas dinner menu the way I did every single year around that time. My phone rang. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. I smiled, expecting a casual conversation about holiday plans, maybe a question about what he should bring this year. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice carrying a strange, careful tone I recognized immediately, the tone of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say. "Hi, sweetheart, I was just going through the Christmas menu. What do you think about?" "Mom, actually, that's kind of what I'm calling about," he interrupted gently. "Vanessa and I have been talking, and we think it might be best if this year Christmas happens without you there." I sat completely still, the recipe box open on my lap, a faded index card for cranberry sauce still in my hand. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, though I had heard him perfectly clearly. "It's not personal, Mom," he continued quickly, the words tumbling out in the rehearsed way people speak when they're trying to get through something uncomfortable as fast as possible. "It's just, there's been so much tension between you and Vanessa lately, and we thought, for the sake of peace this year, maybe it would be easier if you weren't there. The kids won't feel caught in the middle. Everyone can just relax and enjoy the holiday without any friction." Peace, that was the word he used. As if my presence at my own family's Christmas gathering was the disruption. As if 30 years of hosting, cooking, decorating, opening my home to everyone who needed somewhere to belong had somehow become the obstacle standing between my family and their happiness. "Where exactly is this Christmas happening?" I asked quietly, though some part of me already suspected the answer before he said it. There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause. "We were thinking, your place, actually," Ryan said carefully. "It's the biggest space, everyone's used to it, the kids love the backyard for the ornament hunt tradition. Vanessa thought it would be easiest if we just used your house, but you spent Christmas with Aunt Carol instead this year, just to keep the peace." I want you to sit with that for a moment, the way I had to sit with it that evening. My son was asking to use my house, the home I had built, maintained, and opened generously for 30 years, to host nearly 40 relatives for Christmas, while asking me, the actual owner of that house, to not be present for it. "So let me understand this correctly," I said slowly, keeping my voice steady despite everything crumbling quietly inside me. "You want to have Christmas at my house with my family, using my traditions, but without me actually being there." "When you say it like that, it sounds worse than it is," Ryan said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "It's just 1 year, Mom, just to smooth things over with Vanessa, you'll understand." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I looked down at that faded cranberry sauce recipe card in my hand, written in my own handwriting from 30 years earlier, and I felt something inside me shift from heartbreak into an entirely different kind of clarity. "I understand completely," I said finally, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. "Thank you for letting me know your plans." I hung up the phone before he could say anything else. I sat in my kitchen for a long time that evening, staring at that recipe box, thinking about 30 years of Christmas mornings, 30 years of watching my family grow within those walls, 30 years of never once being asked to leave my own home so that someone else's comfort could take priority over my own place within my family. By the time I finally stood up from that kitchen table, I had made a decision. If my son and his wife believed my house could simply be used as a venue while I was quietly erased from the celebration entirely, they were about to learn something important about exactly whose name was on that deed. I didn't call Ryan back that week. I didn't argue, didn't plead my case, didn't demand an explanation for how 30 years of tradition had led to this moment. Instead, I did something far more effective. I stayed completely, deliberately quiet. I want to be honest about something here. In the days following that phone call, I considered several different responses. I considered simply allowing it to happen, swallowing the hurt the way I had swallowed so many smaller hurts over the previous 2 years, attending Christmas at my sister Carol's house instead, pretending everything was fine for the sake of avoiding further conflict. But something about that particular phone call, the casual way Ryan had asked to use my own house while excluding me from it, made something inside me finally refuse to bend any further. I spent the following week gathering my thoughts and, more practically, gathering information. I learned through a conversation with my niece Jessica that invitations had already gone out to the extended family, nearly 40 relatives, all expecting to arrive at my house on Christmas Day at 2 p.m., exactly as they had every year for 3 decades. Vanessa had apparently taken over organizing the catering, the decorations, even sending a group message with parking instructions for my own driveway. The full scope of what was happening became clear to me during that week. This wasn't simply about excluding me from one holiday gathering. This was about my son and his wife quietly repositioning themselves as the hosts of a tradition that had always belonged to me, using my physical home as the backdrop for that repositioning, while removing me entirely from the picture. I made a few important decisions during that week of quiet preparation. First, I decided I would not attend Christmas at my sister Carol's house, despite Ryan's suggestion. Carol, when I explained the situation to her honestly, was horrified on my behalf and completely understood why I needed to handle this my own way. Second, I decided I would not simply hand over my house for a celebration I wasn't welcome to attend. This wasn't about pettiness. It was about a basic principle I refused to compromise on. No one gets to use what belongs to me while simultaneously telling me I'm not wanted in the same space. Third, and most importantly, I decided that if my absence was truly what would bring my extended family peace this year, then peace was exactly what they were going to get. Complete, undisturbed, unmistakable peace, the kind that comes from a locked front door and an empty driveway. I contacted a locksmith the following Monday quietly, without mentioning anything to Ryan or anyone else in the family. I had the locks changed on both the front and back doors, a simple, practical decision that took less than an hour to complete. I also made a decision about the 40 relatives who were expecting to gather at my house that Christmas day, many of whom had no idea I had been excluded from my own tradition. I decided they deserved to understand exactly what had happened, rather than simply being turned away at a locked door with no explanation at all. I wrote a letter. Not an angry letter, not a dramatic one, but a calm, clear explanation of exactly what had occurred over the previous 2 weeks, printed and ready to be taped to my own front door on Christmas morning, where every arriving relative would see it clearly before they ever tried the doorknob. I spent the remaining days before Christmas doing something I hadn't done in years, planning a quiet, peaceful holiday entirely for myself. I decided I would spend Christmas Day exactly where I wanted to be. In my own home, decorated exactly the way I liked it, cooking a smaller, simpler meal just for myself, finally free from the exhausting effort of trying to hold together a tradition that no longer valued my presence within it. On Christmas Eve, Ryan called once more, his voice light and casual, mentioning final details about timing, asking if I'd left a spare key with the neighbor just in case, since he and Vanessa planned to arrive early to start setting up. The locks are actually new, I told him simply. I had them changed last week. There was a pause on the line. New locks, why would you? I'll explain everything tomorrow, I said calmly, and ended the call before he could ask anything further. I woke up on Christmas Day feeling something I hadn't expected to feel: calm. Not the heavy, exhausted calm of someone resigned to disappointment, but a clear, steady calm that comes from finally standing firmly on a decision you know is right. I made myself a simple breakfast, put on soft Christmas music, and sat by my own window with a cup of coffee, watching my quiet street slowly come alive with the sounds of a neighborhood celebrating the holiday. Around 1:30 p.m., exactly as expected, I heard the first cars arriving. I watched through my window as my brother-in-law's car pulled into the driveway, followed shortly by my niece Jessica's family, then several more vehicles filling the street in front of my house, exactly as they had every Christmas for 30 years. I watched as they approached the front door, carrying dishes for the potluck, gifts for the children, the same warm, familiar energy I had loved being part of for 3 decades. I watched as the first person, my brother-in-law, Frank, reached for the door handle and found it locked. I watched him try again, assuming perhaps a simple mistake, before noticing the letter taped clearly at eye level on the front door. I stayed inside, watching quietly through the window, as one relative after another gathered around that letter, reading it together, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to something closer to outrage as they understood exactly what it said. The letter read simply, "To my family, 2 weeks ago, my son and his wife asked me not to attend Christmas this year in my own home so that the day could be more peaceful. I've decided to honor that request completely. Since my presence was the source of tension they wanted to avoid, I've also decided my house, the one I've opened to this family for 30 years, should remain closed today as well. I love every one of you, and I'm deeply sorry you're learning this news at my front door instead of from me directly sooner. Please feel free to gather somewhere else today. I hope you have a peaceful Christmas. With love, Margaret. I watched Ryan's car pull up several minutes later, Vanessa beside him in the passenger seat, both of them completely unaware of what was unfolding until they stepped out of the car and saw nearly 40 relatives standing confused and increasingly upset in my driveway and front yard, several of them already reading the letter for a second or third time. I watched Ryan's face as he read it himself, his confident expression collapsing into something between panic and disbelief. I watched him try the door handle repeatedly, as if trying hard enough might somehow change what had already happened. I watched Aunt Carol approach him directly, her voice carrying clearly enough that I could hear fragments through my window, something about how could you ask your own mother to leave her own house, and 30 years, Ryan, 30 years. I watched Vanessa standing slightly apart from the growing crowd of confused, upset relatives, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, though I imagine she understood exactly how badly this had unfolded compared to whatever peaceful vision she had originally imagined. I didn't open the door. I didn't step outside to explain further or soften the moment. I had already explained everything as clearly and calmly as I knew how, in a letter that spoke my truth without a single raised voice. After nearly 20 minutes of confusion in my driveway, I watched the crowd slowly begin to disperse, relatives climbing back into their cars, some clearly upset with Ryan and Vanessa, others simply confused about where to go now that the tradition they'd relied on for 30 years had unexpectedly collapsed. Ryan stayed behind after most relatives had left, standing alone in my driveway for several long minutes, staring at the locked front door, at the letter still taped clearly at eye level, seemingly unsure of what to do next. Eventually, he knocked. Not the confident, casual knock of someone expecting immediate entry, but a slower, more hesitant sound. I walked to the door, but I didn't open it. Instead, I spoke clearly through the closed door, loud enough for him to hear. I think we should talk tomorrow, Ryan, once everyone's had time to process today calmly. Today, I'm simply enjoying the peaceful Christmas you and Vanessa wanted for everyone. I heard him standing there for a long moment, silent, before I finally heard his footsteps retreating slowly back toward his car. News of what happened at my house that Christmas Day spread through the family almost immediately. By that evening, I had received nearly a dozen phone calls and messages from relatives, some checking in on me with genuine concern, others expressing shock and frustration at what Ryan and Vanessa had attempted to do. My sister Carol called first, her voice still carrying traces of the outrage I'd heard through my window earlier that day. Margaret, I had no idea any of this was happening. Why didn't you tell me sooner what they were asking of you? I didn't want to make anyone choose sides prematurely, I told her honestly. I needed to handle it my own way first. My niece Jessica called shortly after, apologizing repeatedly for not noticing the tension building over the previous months, admitting she had heard small comments from Vanessa over time, but never realized how serious the situation had actually become. Several other relatives reached out as well, each conversation revealing a similar pattern. Most of my extended family had genuinely believed the no tension, no friction Christmas Vanessa had described to them was simply about scaling back the size of the gathering, not about completely removing me from my own home celebration. Ryan called that evening, his voice heavy with a mixture of embarrassment and genuine hurt. Mom, do you understand what you did today? 40 people showed up to a locked house. Do you know how humiliating that was? I understand exactly what happened today, I said calmly. The same thing that would have happened to me quietly, invisibly, if I hadn't decided to make it visible instead. You asked me to disappear from my own family's Christmas, Ryan. I simply made sure everyone understood exactly what that request actually meant, rather than letting it happen silently. We could have handled this differently, he said. You didn't have to embarrass us like that in front of the entire family. "I didn't embarrass you, Ryan," I said gently but firmly. "You did that yourself the moment you decided asking your own mother to leave her own house was an acceptable way to keep the peace. I simply stopped absorbing the consequences of that decision quietly, the way I've been absorbing smaller versions of it for 2 years now." There was a long silence on the line. "I didn't realize it had been building for that long," Ryan finally admitted, his voice quieter now, some of the earlier defensiveness fading. "I know you didn't," I said, "because it's much easier not to notice something when you're not the one being slowly pushed out of the picture." We didn't resolve everything on that phone call. Some wounds, especially ones that build quietly over years before finally becoming impossible to ignore, don't heal in a single conversation. But something important shifted that evening. For the first time in 2 years, Ryan seemed to genuinely understand the weight of what had actually been happening, rather than simply seeing isolated individual requests that seemed reasonable enough on their own. In the weeks that followed, several extended family members reached out to me directly, organizing an informal gathering at Aunt Carol's house for the following weekend, a smaller celebration, but one where every single person present had specifically wanted me there, rather than one where my presence had become something to be carefully managed or quietly eliminated. Vanessa, notably, didn't reach out at all in those first few weeks. I later learned, through Jessica, that she felt deeply humiliated by how the day had unfolded, though I noticed she never seemed to reflect on the fact that her own request had set the entire situation into motion in the first place. About a month after Christmas, Ryan asked to meet with me alone without Vanessa present, at a quiet coffee shop we used to visit together when he was younger. He looked tired when he arrived, older somehow than I remembered him looking just weeks earlier. He sat down across from me and was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began, "about how this had been building for 2 years, not just this one Christmas. I went back through everything, the catering suggestions, the guest list decisions, all of it. I think I convinced myself each individual request was reasonable without ever stepping back to see the full pattern." "That's often how these things work," I said gently. "No single moment feels significant enough to fight over. It's only when you add them all together that the real picture becomes clear." "I should have defended you more," he admitted. "Especially these last 2 years. I kept telling myself I was just trying to keep peace between you and Vanessa, but I think what I was actually doing was avoiding an uncomfortable conversation by slowly giving in to whatever kept things quiet in the short term." I appreciated his honesty, though I made sure to tell him clearly that understanding the pattern now didn't erase the hurt of what had actually happened. "I'm glad you're seeing this clearly, Ryan, but I need you to understand something important. Real peace was never actually the goal of what you and Vanessa were asking for. Real peace doesn't require erasing someone from their own family's celebration. What you were asking for was convenience, dressed up in the language of peace." He nodded slowly, absorbing that distinction. "Real peace," I continued, "would have meant sitting down together, honestly discussing whatever tension existed between Vanessa and me, and working through it directly, even if that conversation felt uncomfortable. What almost happened instead was avoidance disguised as diplomacy, quietly removing the person causing discomfort rather than addressing why that discomfort existed in the first place." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table between us. "I don't know exactly how to fix this," he finally said. "Between you and Vanessa, I mean, I don't think either of you is entirely wrong, and I don't think either of you is entirely right either." "That's probably the most honest thing you've said to me in 2 years, I told him, and for the first time in that entire conversation, I saw something like a genuine, unguarded smile cross his face. We didn't solve everything in that conversation. Vanessa and I still have real, unresolved tension between us, tension that will likely require honest, direct conversation between the two of us eventually, rather than continuing to flow entirely through Ryan as an intermediary. But something important did shift that day. Ryan finally understood, clearly and completely, that asking his own mother to disappear from her own family's tradition was never actually a solution to anything. It was simply a postponement of a harder, more necessary conversation that still needed to happen eventually. In the months following that Christmas, my relationship with my extended family actually grew stronger in many ways, even as my relationship with Ryan and Vanessa specifically remained complicated and still healing. Aunt Carol and I grew closer than we'd been in years, our weekly phone calls becoming something I genuinely looked forward to. Several younger relatives, including my niece Jessica, began reaching out more frequently, making clear efforts to include me in smaller gatherings throughout the year, not just the major holidays. I hosted a smaller Easter gathering that following spring, not the full 40 relatives I was accustomed to, but a warm, genuine group of about 15 people who specifically wanted to be there, cooking and celebrating together in the same house that had briefly, painfully, been the site of such deep hurt just months earlier. Ryan and Vanessa attended that Easter gathering as well, and though the interactions between Vanessa and me remained somewhat careful and formal, there was a noticeable shift in the underlying dynamic. I was no longer someone being quietly managed or strategically minimized. I was simply present as myself in my own home, exactly as I had every right to be. I want to be honest about something important here. I don't believe families need to pretend every conflict resolves neatly or completely. Vanessa and I may never become close in the way some families experience. But what changed after that Christmas wasn't necessarily the depth of our relationship. It was the honesty surrounding it. Tension that exists openly, acknowledged by everyone involved, is far healthier than tension that gets quietly managed by erasing one person from important moments in order to avoid addressing it directly. I also made a personal decision during those months that felt important for my own well-being. I began setting clearer boundaries around hosting responsibilities going forward. I made clear that while I was happy to continue hosting major holidays, decisions about guest lists, catering, and format needed to include me directly, not filtered through second-hand conversations or assumptions about what I would simply accept without complaint. That boundary, communicated calmly and clearly rather than through quiet resentment, actually improved my relationship with the entire extended family. People understood more clearly what genuine collaboration around these traditions actually required, rather than assuming my role was simply to accommodate whatever changes anyone else decided were necessary. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this: peace that requires erasing someone isn't actually peace at all. It's simply postponed conflict dressed up in more comfortable language. For 2 years, I mistook my own quiet accommodation for maintaining family harmony. I absorbed small slights, small exclusions, small redefinitions of my role within my own family's traditions, telling myself I was being flexible, understanding, easy to get along with. What I was actually doing was slowly teaching the people around me that my boundaries, my feelings, and my rightful place within my own family could be negotiated away, piece by piece, without any real consequence. The locked door on Christmas Day wasn't really about revenge, though I understand why it might look that way from the outside. It was about finally making visible something that had been happening invisibly for 2 years, the quiet erasure of my presence from spaces and traditions that had always belonged to me as much as anyone else in that family. To anyone listening who recognizes a similar pattern in their own life, being slowly, politely pushed toward the margins of your own family, your own traditions, your own home, I want you to understand something important. You don't have to accept exclusion quietly simply because it's been framed as necessary for someone else's comfort. Real peace requires honesty, not disappearance. It requires direct conversation, not quiet accommodation that slowly erases you from your own life. Ryan and I are still rebuilding our relationship, one honest conversation at a time. I don't know exactly what next Christmas will look like, whether it will happen at my house again, whether Vanessa and I will ever find real closeness rather than careful, guarded politeness. But I know this much clearly. Whatever happens going forward will happen with my full participation and honest voice included in the decision. not quietly decided around me while I'm expected to simply accept whatever arrangement feels most convenient for everyone else. 30 years of Christmas taught me how to open my home generously to the people I love. This past Christmas taught me something equally important: how to close that same door clearly, calmly, and without apology, when the people I love forget that generosity should never come at the cost of my own dignity. If this story resonated with you, remember, real peace never requires anyone to disappear. If someone in your life is asking you to quietly step back for everyone's sake, ask yourself honestly whose comfort is actually being protected and whose voice is being quietly erased in the process. The truth eventually finds the surface, one way or another. Sometimes it arrives through honest conversation, and sometimes it arrives standing confused in a driveway, reading a letter taped to a locked front door. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and stay with us for more true stories of family, boundaries, and the quiet strength it takes to finally stop disappearing for everyone else's comfort.